Hey everyone, it's Max, and welcome to the new single line track switch tutorial. And what you're looking at here from above is, of course, our single line track switch. And of course, we have multiple towns that we want to go to, but we don't want to spend all the money on building multiple tracks to get there. And what we have here, of course, is the track switch itself. You'll notice that from my older design back in 1.8 to this design, there is no overhead whatsoever. In fact, the blocks here are just for providing light. Everything is now controlled underground with these three switches right here, and of course the SFDs are now just simply controlled as they always have been with the button. So we're going to have a look on how this works and talk a little bit about that. But first, a demonstration, and we'll go to daytime for that. And just like that, it's daytime. So let's talk about why you need a switch track. So of course you have two locations. So this is your first base of operations. You've done something. You've built a base in the house and the mine shafts and whatever. And then you find a second location and you think, I want to build a rail track between the two locations. So you do, and life is good, right? So you mine iron and you make track and you put two locations and life is good. And now all of a sudden you're traveling between your two locations, so between your original town and your new location, whatever this is. And so like let's say this is a desert with a desert thing on it, and you're doing good. And then over here you've discovered a mushroom biome and you're thinking, yeah, I'd like to set up a third location. Well, the problem is that with a single line track, uh, you couldn't do that. So what people would do is they would build, right, a second line to their location, right? So they would build a line up to this location, then they would build one back this way. So then, of course, you had two lines to go to each location, right? So you would either take this line to go to that one, or you would take this line to go to that one. And of course, it was all three locations needed two lines, and this, of course, just doubled or tripled all your track needs. And then, of course, if you ever found a fourth location, well, now you're in trouble, right? So you got to build a track, to this location from this one, and you got to build a track location from this one over to this one, which of course now you got to build a track location from this one all the way over somehow to the other location, right? And then of course it's getting messy, right? So now it doesn't really matter anyway. So of course you're getting it over here, and for each location, so now you need three tracks for each location, and as you go on and on and on, of course it just gets messy, right? It's just bonkers. So if you found like a fifth location and you want to set up tracks, well, good luck to you, because you'd have so many tracks going on here that you'd be wasting iron. And why would you? That's just silly talk. I'm telling you. When you can do it all with one line of track. That's right. So let's get rid of all this mess and we'll talk about that. Holy smokes. Look at all the track I got to destroy here just for this tutorial. I'm going to cut here. Just give me a second. Okay, it took me so long to clean up that mess, I actually had to reset the day. It was terrible. So, of course, let's put our line of track in here between our two locations. And so you've now discovered a new third location you'd like to go to, and that's great. So what you should do is that instead of building double lines of track, you would just build your third line coming out, and you would like to join it up to the first track of your first two locations. This has always been the problem, the dilemma, as it were, though. How does one join this up, but yet if of course the problem now is that this is always turned to these two locations. If I want to go to this third location, how do I get this track to switch from this direction to that direction? Okay, and that has always been the big hang up of a switch track. So we need two things to make switch tracks work, and that's above ground and below ground. Above ground, each of the three directions needs what is called an SFD, or stop for destination track, and all it is basically a bumper. Okay, so this bumper track, as you're looking at it here, is basically a place where we can stop temporarily, make a decision on where we want to go, then continue on our way. And that is what SFDs do for us. So it's even more realistic with this tutorial because now the switches that you see here are actually just like the train switches you would see on a railway track for changing the direction. So if you wanted to go onto a second track, you would change the direction. It doesn't quite work that way, but it's very close. But the switches do work that way. When I flip the switch, it would switch the direction. Now, the other thing about making a switch track is with your SFDs, you've got to have the wiring underneath. And my bad flying skill here. All right, so here is our new compact wiring, which of course allows us to keep everything nice and compact and really tight now. In my older tutorial, you used to have a lot of repeaters, and of course, along with those repeaters, they would of course reset our memory circuit. This one, of course, only requires a couple of repeaters, and the memory circuit reset is not on a timer system, but is now totally safe because you do the reset yourself after you've gone through the switch. So I guess there's a plus and minus to that. The plus is that once you've made your selection, after 5 or 6 seconds, it didn't go back. So if you made your selection and then didn't hit the button right away, you didn't have to worry. You didn't have to worry about it switching back the other direction again, and then of course you going the wrong way. The one thing about this is that when you make a decision now, it remembers the decision until after you go through the track and run over this pressure pad. So the trick there now is, of course, is that if you did make well, let's say you change your mind. You actually can't change your mind. You actually have to go follow through with what you were going to do. But I think it's the better option anyway. A lot of people, though they had great success with the track, they ended up adding even more repeaters to my old design just so as the track would stay turned longer. And of course, instead, now we don't need to do that at all. So there's two parts to this tutorial. The first part is the making as an SFD, and then of course we need to make the underground wiring. So with that, I'm going to stop here for a second, and we're going to take one of these out to actually make the SFD going for this direction here. So hold on a second. Okay, so before getting started on anything, the first thing you actually have to do is lay down your three-way switch. The best thing to do is the block that the actual switch is going to sit on top of, I usually make some different type of block. Now the reason that is because when you start working underground, you're going to want to be able to see this stuff real easy. And sure enough, there is my track switch. So by making this block different, when I start my underground work, I can easily see this is where the switch is. Now, when it comes to the switch, you have two tracks on the three directions you want, and then of course put your track in the middle. That's it. It doesn't matter which way it goes. It doesn't matter if it's left, if it's right. It doesn't matter. Because if the tracks were running this way, okay, it's going to be in that direction, okay? Or if the tracks were running in this direction, okay, then it's going to run this way anyway. So it doesn't matter what three directions you pick, okay? And it doesn't matter that whatever direction it picks in the end for you, left, right, whatever. As long as you've picked your center and then two tracks on either side of these three directions. So if this is the center, okay, once again, this is the center. I've put a piece of track in it, and then 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now, I always put the track in the center last so as I get the curve. You want the curve piece, okay? And then with that, we are now ready to go off and make an SFD. So here, of course, I've left these two alone because it just saves me a little time from rebuilding all three of them. But here, of course, would be our our center, and two on this side, two on this side, and then two here. Now, one other thing I'll point out. When you're making a three-way track switch, there's a line and then an add-on, right? So this is location 1, this is location 2, and this is location 3. Okay, the locations 1 and 2 is the ones that you run straight through to, and location 3 is always your add-on. Okay, it's the one that has no partner on the other side. Now, the reason I mention that is because it has no effect on SFDs, but when it comes to the wiring later, we always do our partners together, and then the add-on is always added on. Okay, but right now let's do the actual SFD. So in this particular case, starting out from the switch, we go our 2 out, and then we put 3 tracks down to the right. Okay, now once your 3 tracks are down to the right, I am actually going to run 5 power tracks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now, the reason we run 5 power tracks is because this is just to help me gauge the distance of my track on the other side. Okay. Now, on the other side, I actually got to take this track back out a second because I don't want to run into it. So I'm going to pop that one out. Okay. And then do 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to bring my track up to this, just short of block 1. 1, 2, 3 to the right, and start running it down the other side. Okay. So you can already see that SFD look to it. Okay. And I'll put my 5th power track back in here so you can see it. So you got these 5 power tracks on either side, and then on either side of that you're going to run 3 tracks. 3 pieces of track moving to the right on both sides, and then start running your track down the sides. Okay. Now, as mentioned, to get this track to run to the right, okay, you cannot have track here or here. Okay. So I'll just take these out for a second and show you. And I don't believe in having it dark, so let me pause here for a second. We'll have daytime. Okay. So if I had my 5 power tracks down and I tried to go to my 3 tracks to the right, see what it tries to do? It automatically hooks into this power track. We don't want that. So I had to take this track out, and I have to take this one out to get my rights to work, and then I can put my power ones back in. Okay. Now, the one coming from the switch. All right. So coming back from the switch one, I've come out a couple. All right, we're going to come up 1, 2, 3, and on the 4th one, all right, you're going to turn to the left and put in a pressure pad. All right. Now coming into the switch, you're going to come up 4 power tracks, and you're just going to put in a regular track, like so. Now we actually have the design. So the incoming track is just going to turn, swerve to the right, and hook in. The outbound track from the switch is going to come out to the right, swing in, but run over a pressure pad before it continues on. Now we take the center block or center track out, put in our block of choice, okay, and on this side coming into the switch, we add a button. All right. 2 things left to do. All right. On the top of the incoming switch track here, knock this block out and put in a marker block. All right. Now the reason we're doing that is because this we're going to put a lever on it momentarily. Okay. On this side, right beside the pressure pad and right beside your post, knock this block out and just leave it knocked out until the end. All right. Now the reason is because this now completes okay, our SFD track. And I'll even put the lever on this one so as we can get the lever working on that. Now, of course, your lever, you can play with levers however you want, okay? If you want them in the other direction, like so. So, the only trick here is, of course, is that the lever, okay, by default, all right, has to be in its off state, all right? And because I've just been flip-flopping that back and forth, of course, this is now very excited down here, so I'm just going to reset all this for a second. And I got to put this line back in, but I got to take this torch out, so you can just ignore all this for a second. There we go. All right. So that's just because I was playing with this lever. Okay, the lever has to be in its off state. All right. Now the reason is that so when we go to hook up all the wiring down there, all three levers that you've put down, none of them are providing power, which of course makes wiring a little bit more tricky when you go to wire this all up. All right, so with that, all right, that is now our SFD. We can now test this. All right, so I know I got a track over here somewhere. We can test our new SFD and give this a shot. All right, off we go. So we're coming in, and we actually want to go straight through here. This actually would turn to the right by default, which would take us down to that one. I actually want to go through my new SFD, so like so, and perfect. The new SFD is working flawlessly coming out. Now let's test it going in. Now, of course, you're not going to have any wiring hooked up underneath this when you go to test. And that looks pretty good. In fact, I'll even take the train back here. So you're not going to have any wiring to test that. So how do you test your SFD? The way you test it is just temporarily make this a straight line track. Okay, so obviously these switches won't work. Okay, you can play with them because of course there's no wiring on yours because that won't be in. That's the next part of the tutorial. But just replace that with a straight through switch just so you can test SFDs going straight through. And as you can see, we can hit it on the way back and we should go straight through again. We'll just push the button and we'll just go straight through. Perfect. And now we'll head on back. All right. Now I'm going to go, of course, replace this again. Okay, so with that, we are now done with the SFD portion of our track, and now it's time for the wiring underneath. Okay, here we are underneath the track, and of course, we want to look at the three components to making this all work. So there is the track switches, and of course I got you to put a block underneath each of these switches. Okay, so there's one there, and of course there's one over here. Now, I also got you to put a block underneath the actual track itself. Okay, and you could have actually used a different block for each for the track versus the switches. I just used wood in both cases, so as I could easily see it. I also have left these holes, and these holes, of course, are for my reset buttons. Okay, so the switches are going to switch the track, then the buttons are going to play the reset to put it back to normal. That's the best part about it. Okay, no more needing a lot of repeaters to delay the circuit. Part 3 is the memory circuit itself and controlling the switch itself using this memory circuit. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to switch this over a little bit and it will be deconstructed so we can build some of it. Okay, so we've done a little deconstruction work here, and as you can see there's not a whole lot of it left. And so what we want to do here is that this is now showing us the 3 underground SFDs and the 2 spots of each that we're going to connect to. So for each of these spots, okay, so this is our first lever, and all I did was build a staircase down. Okay, here is our second lever with a staircase down, and here is our third lever with a staircase down. Now, here of course are the holes that I got you to put in right beside your post and your pressure pad. And when you look up and you see the post, you want to put it right beside it, of course. So once again, I built a staircase down. Over here, of course, I built a staircase down, and sure enough, over here in position 3, I built a staircase down and put redstone on top of all of this to make them walk them down. Now, I'm going to reset that sun, and we'll have a look at it. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we actually want to not even play with our 6 blocks that we've got now made. Okay, so we've built our little staircases down and we've put redstone on top of them, but actually what we want to do first is the switch itself. So here's the switch itself. I'm actually going to put I'm going to put 3 blocks straight down. I'll take the top one off, okay, and build a little staircase like so, okay. And now I'm going to put a torch on that, and we'll run a piece of redstone or 2 off of it. Okay, looks pretty snazzy. Now, from the switch, this is the back of the switch. So this up here has no track on it. So the piece that has no track on it, which would be in this direction, because you got track going that way, and then our oddball running that way. So the direction that has no track, count 2 spaces from it and make a memory circuit. Now to make a memory circuit is basically you put a block. I'm a little high here. 3 by 3 block. Okay, so you're going to put a block, count out 2, count left 2, put a block down. And we will now put down 2 torches facing towards each other in the block. Then what you do is you wire the 2 blocks together, and what you've now created is a memory block. In other words, one side of the block will always be on an on state, while the other side will always be in the off state. This torch is burning out this torch, and because this torch is burned out, this torch can keep running. What's going to happen here is our switches and reset buttons are going to keep flip-flopping this circuit, and that circuit is going to keep switching our track in the end. So now what we can do is we can actually take the memory circuit and we will hook it to the switch. Now this burns this torch out. It doesn't matter. It does not matter which way this is going to go, because what's going to happen in the end is the memory circuit will need a first time run through to set it properly, and so we'll finish building it. We'll do our one time run through, and then this will set up the circuit right to make sure that this is on the on or off switch that it needs. Now let's hook up our actual switches. Now the actual switches we're going to run above the ground. So I am 3 spaces here. So if I was actually above ground, I would have a layer and then dig down 3. And in this particular case, we're going to run the blocks, okay, and join our 3 switches together with like a little bridge block, okay. Now, as I mentioned, the oddball out over here just happens to get attached as we're going from left to right. So we're going to run left to right, and I'll just take that piece back because that wasn't supposed to be there. All right. Now, running back over here, the one that's closest to our memory circuit. Now, before we put something to the memory circuit, we do need 1 repeater. This switch over on the far end to run all the ways down here to the memory circuit will not make it. So usually I put a repeater right here in the middle of this bridge. Now we run down and hook into the back side of this memory circuit. like so. Now the other two switches make this distance no problem, and we'll reset the circuit on this side, but that third switch just does not go far enough. Now for once you've got one side hooked up, we need some way to reset the other side, and this is where we now look at our three reset pressure pads. There they are. And we are now going to take these. This, though, what we're going to do with this is we're actually going to go underground. And this is why we built the switches on top of a bridge, because we're now going to actually dig down and go underground for this part. So coming off of this, we're then going to dig down one, dig down two, and actually go right underneath this. And we're just going to cruise right along here. Notice we're going right by our switch on the right here, and our oddball will be on the left, but I will come back to him momentarily. And you have to keep going by this, so you have to keep on digging, okay? Because you don't want to dig into that, because that memory circuit would get all messed up. Okay. Now we're gonna turn to the right here, and then start working our way up. So I'll bring this line along, and then start working my way up. Now I've got two of them hooked in, okay, and I can actually plug into the side of the memory circuit right here if I wanted to, so I can do that. All right. Now for the third one. So I would hop out of the hole over there. Now here I want to dig one, down two, and come underneath this bridge, and sure enough, we're hooked in. Then we want to go back and do one thing, and that is going to be, that's right, a repeater. And the reason, once again, for the repeater is that we just don't have enough distance on that third one to make it all of this way. And this one does have enough distance, so you don't have to put the repeater after the intersection. It can be before. In fact, I could have put my repeater in before I even dug this oddball into the track, but by digging that in, I actually know I can put my repeater like here, for example. And away we go. Now, the reason we're getting feedback on this line is because this is the live side of the memory circuit. Okay, and which of course is fine. That's not a problem. We are now done connecting the entire circuit together, and we can now actually go test this. Now, this is where you got to probably run it through one time to see to see if you've got your memory circuit's turned on right or if it's not. Now, this is where I'm going to flip the switch. So this is where we're stationed at right now. I'm going to flip this switch, and we should see this change direction. Right now it's turned towards me. It should turn away from me when I flip this switch. So here we go. Look at that. It is now turned away from me. So I will now jump in the cart, hit the button, and when I get to the other side, I'm going to run over the pressure plate, which should reset the direction coming back towards me. Okay, and just to stop that, we'll go back here. And sure enough, if you look at it, it is now turned back towards me here on this original stop. So that means our memory circuit was right the first time. Now, if it wasn't, okay, all that would have done, okay, so when we hit the switch, it wouldn't have changed direction. And you would have gone like, what? And that's fine, okay? All that means is that you have to run your train one time over a reset switch so as it can actually do the reset on your pads, and then you should be ready to go. Now with everything done, we should now be able to pick this up. And I, of course, am in creative mode, so I can't just pick it up. I have to actually do something with it. And we'll come over here, jump inside, give it a whirl. So in this particular case, if I want to go straight through, that's what the track's going to allow me to do. But if I want to go to the left, I flip my switch. It is now turned to the left. I can now hit my button, and away I go. And sure enough, I take off. Now, our reset button actually does two jobs here. The first job of the reset button is to actually reset the direction of this track. Okay? The second job of this button actually works as a slingshot for you to keep going down the track. So as the train is coming over this pressure pad, of course, it's getting set with the live circuit and carrying on down the track. Bonus. So that is it. You now have a working three-way directional switch track. And of course, you can now add even more destinations. And you're thinking, what am I talking about? Well, just because you've now got three destinations doesn't mean you can't add a fourth or a fifth or even more. So let's say over here somewhere, you now discover uh, an ocean, and you would like to have like a dockyard to your ocean. Okay? And you're thinking, yeah, this is going to be cool. So what will we do? Not a big deal at all. Okay? You're now going to build a new switch track. Okay? You're just going to take your switch track and you're going to build it here. So you take this piece out, you put in your block, you put in your switch, okay? And then of course you're going to count out your 2 and you put your SFD starting there, count out your D2, put your SFD, if this is your town wouldn't be so close, you'd put your SFD in here, and then of course you would count out 2 and you would put your SFD out in there, and then of course you would go wire this, and then you would have a switch there and a switch here, and then if you wanted a new town over here, for example, so like let's say you have a town here, you could actually do a couple of switches. You could put a switch here to go from this town over this way. You could also put a switch in like somewheres up here to come to this town coming this way, and then switch in here. You can have switches and single line tracks to as many destinations as you want, and as long as you put in your 3 SFDs and then put in the wiring for the three-way switch afterwards, you're set to go. So with that is the tutorial on a three-way track switch. And of course, this is an all-inclusive tutorial, so the SFDs are built first with your three-way switch track. Then the wiring done underneath is next. And of course, with this more simpler method, you don't have any of that bulky overhead like in my first tutorial. It's all done nicely underneath. One thing to note, do not forget to switch your tracks back off. All right. So in other words, do not switch the track on and then leave this on. You have to turn this back off. Okay, and that's because if you don't, this will provide continuous power to the memory circuit, and your reset switch won't reset the memory circuit because this will always be giving it power. So the memory will always be on. And so in this case, once you flip your switch, you have to flip it back off before you leave your stations. That's about it. The only other thing I can tell you to recommend about SFDs is that north, south, east, and west tend to have a little bit of influence on them. So you'll notice that a track, for example, coming in, where am I here? So let's do an F3 here for a second. Let's go to north. So in this particular case, we are now pointed north. If we're coming up to the northern track, you may actually find, for example, that you should put your last live power track maybe 10 or 15 blocks away from the SFD. But when you're coming in from like the east and west, you may have to move them up to like 8 or 7 to get them into the SFD, and I'll show you why. In this particular case, when you come into an SFD, the way it really works is, and oh look, we'll just borrow this train right here. When you come into the SFD, the most important part is that the train must be bumped up against this block. Okay? And I just want to fly out here. So you'll notice it has very little, it's actually gapped out now. This actually may not have worked. Okay? And so I'm actually going to take this, come back here, and we'll try it. So this may or may not work because I've got so much power coming into this block that it appears that I may actually have too much space here. And because we're going in that direction, we'll actually flip that around. Oh, I might have actually broken the circuit when I got playing around over here. Oh, that's right. I haven't gone through the block yet. So that's okay. In this particular case, okay, I did have enough. But if you come into the block and you're not butted right up against it, when you push the button, your train may not take off. All right. So to fix that, what you can do is try moving your last power rail farther away, so as when your train comes in, it's actually running slow enough to just park in the block. If you come into the block too fast, you'll actually kick out too far and you won't be able to use the buttons. So you'll notice that from different directions, east and west, north and south, you may actually need to change the distance of your last power rail coming into the SFD block, so as when your train comes in, it parks and snugs in nice against the block. If if you find that you're not having that problem, then don't worry about it. Just do a standard, do a standard 8 count from the SFD and try it from there. If you find that it's kicking you out from the block and you need more distance, then try backing it out 2-3 tracks at a time until you get a nice comfortable distance. But I wouldn't do it for each of them, just the one that's giving you the hassle, because I find like it used to be the Southwest rule, but it's not really the Southwest rule anymore. It's all kind of quirky nowadays. So with that, that is the total building of a three-way track switch. The extra note of making sure that when you switch the track, that you turn the switch off before you take off. And if you're having problems getting snug into your SFD blocks, to back off your last power rail so as you slow down a little bit more before actually parking in the block. Free hint here too, by the way. By adding blocks on corners, you actually slow down even more. So if you find that you're coming into your SFD block still way too fast, you can try adding blocks into a corner like this, and the cart going around the corner, bump bump, tends to bump it just enough to get it to slow down just a little bit more. Free hint for you. With that, this is Max signing off. Good luck on your three-way tracks.